They had cooks who were working and dedicators giving you the best of it. And food would come in all the time. So my old story was that one story about hard rations and kosher and halal, but otherwise the food was A1.
As far as I was concerned, we couldn't get any food that would be passable to a rabbi, so I just had to say to myself, bless the food and call it what I wanted. I had to eat whatever I was given, otherwise I was starved.
There's a story from the Shtetl when the Russian army in the time of the Tsar would come to the villages and take Jewish boys away to serve 20 or 25 years, essentially a death sentence. And in this shtetl, a number of boys got their orders, and they went to see the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, what are we going to do? All they serve is pork." And the rabbi said, "You have to do what you have to do to survive, but don't suck the bone." So an accommodation that I managed, that had to do for some years, was I wouldn't eat anything that couldn't be kosher. That's kind of a negative approach to it, but if it couldn't be made kosher, I wouldn't eat it. So there were times, particularly when we were serving in Germany, that I would survive an awful lot on peanut butter sandwiches. At home, it's no problem. I have a beautiful, beautiful kosher kitchen that Sharon maintained from the day we were married and through today. And you know, there were some sort of side benefits, like there was a period where the seat beside me at the mess dinner, the fancy dinners that our units would put on a couple of times a year, was always hotly contested who would sit beside me, because they'd get 2 shrimp cocktails. Now the combat ration that appeared before, while it was still serving, got to use it a number of times. It was kosher, it was halal, and it was vegetarian. So you can imagine what was in it. Not very much. And I was on exercise one time up in northern Manitoba, and I'd been chatting with the soldiers, and I went off to have lunch and had one of these kosher, halal, vegetarian rations. And then I went down the road a bit and found a young soldier who I learned was a Muslim, and he was eating stuff that his mother wouldn't have wanted him to eat. And I said, "But Mohammed, there's halal rations there." He said, and this was a big boy, he was a big boy, and he said, "Sir, I know they're there, but I gotta have my meat."
Sometimes, just to be passable, I will eat some fish. So here I am invited to the armory up the hill in Oakland from Meston. And everybody's having their roast beef or their chicken or whatever. And I don't really eat any of that stuff. I eat occasionally fish. So about 15 minutes later, they bring me a plate that has a salad. And in the middle is an overturned can of tuna. State of the art. They try.
I'm going to take the privilege of being the moderator just to add one small vignette for something that I feel rather guilty. A number of years ago, General Fitch was the guest of honor at my regiment's annual officers' mess. And knowing that the general is an observant man, I made sure that the menu would contain nothing that, as he said, that he could not eat. The main course, the dessert, everything was well organized. I felt confident. The general, my guest of honor, is seated beside me. The first course arrives, and as described, it was a salad. a salad with 2 lovely large shrimps right on top. And with aplomb, the general delicately removed the 2 shrimps, put them aside, and enjoyed his salad and the rest of the meal.
Now, we live in a society that is always so super strict about everything. But years ago, and this goes to his credit, as well as Toby Hickman, who was also the CEO, that we had in this island, I don't know if we could get the general to agree on this at this time, at that time we could, we had a third Seder. In this armory, we were resting on this armory, and we ate matzah, and we talked about it, and we sat around, and thanks to Rick and Toby, who were then the CEO and VCO of the unit, every Jew that we knew of was invited to come. And we had some people who were from the Second World War at that time, for it. And we were the newer people. And that was a very easy and we talked about some of them.
If memory serves, you shared much too much wine with all of us. Thank you. Each of you have served in the reserves or have been intimately associated with the reserves, in addition to your full-time service. If I can ask if you experienced any unique issues as Jews in the reserve context.
It wasn't exactly as a Jew, but in the reserve context, it's not a full-time job. And the challenge is to get time off from work to be deployed properly. And I always found that there was a bit of a challenge. I had to switch on calls, I had to switch, get the prolongation of what I was doing to say, oh, I can take your call when I come back, please take my call when I'm away. And that really was for me one of the biggest challenges. But even as a Jew, and saying, oh, being in the reserves was a challenge, I can find that.
In the reserves, I was in the reserves for 38 years before I was an honorary colonel for 40 years. I never really had any problem because that I can recall, there were some guys who probably didn't show it overtly, but they may have had anti-Semitic issues covertly. I wouldn't know about it because it never came to me as far as I was concerned. And I had a lot of friends in the Army because, as I said before, my brother Eddie and I were the only Jews in our unit. And I don't think we had any of those problems as far as I was concerned. But the example that I gave you of General Prieur back in '62 might have been one of the covert things. But aside from that, I never actually experienced any problem.
Richard, I'm actually going to pass on this one. I was kind of an accidental reservist and never did belong to a reserve unit. It was a convenience of the crew managers at the time. So I think my comments serving in regular force apply the same.
Padres in the military serve all faiths. Would you share with us your most memorable interactions with Padres?
Well, I was lucky when I was serving in Cyprus with the United Nations that the Padre there was well versed in the history and geography of Cyprus. Because the blue beret, I brought my blue beret, which is the one that I wore at that time. I put it there just to show and tell if you do. So he was so well versed that whenever And I was alternating as the MO, as the medical officer, with a British territorial medical officer. There was just two of us. But sometimes we had a weekend off, or a day off. And he would say, come with me, Marcus, we're going to go see whatever city you wanted to see. Gustav, see everything we would visit. And we'd go to the Turkish side, we would go to the Greek side, and it was like, he really was like a font of knowledge, and taught me so much about the church as it existed in Cyprus, not regular stuff. And he was a Protestant chaplain, but he was well versed. And for me, that was one of the most memorable experiences. When I was in Afghanistan, it was a little bit different. Because in Afghanistan, the padre there, he faced a lot of, they were almost like Dear John situations. He would see a lot of soldiers, he would say, I just got this letter from my wife. She's not my wife anymore, she's walking away from me. And he'd be devastated, because they're so far away, there's nothing you can do to control the situation. And oftentimes we would talk about anything you could do. Myself as an MO, putting the padre, and that was another type of close contact that I had with the padre.
The only padre that I had, it's out now. The only padre that I really had contact with while I was in the active service was Rabbi Gershon Levy. But when I was in the reserve army after the war, I was helping with some of the Jewish branch of the Legion, and Rabbi Samuel Cass was the padre of the Jewish padre of the Legion at that time, and I had a lot to do with him from time to time, and he was a very good man, and I enjoyed him very much.
We can bridge a gap here. I was a young man about the time I joined the Army, but Rabbi Cass was a friend of my dad's, and I got to meet him and hear some of the stories. He was a man of great stature, and indeed my father was a little bit irreverent with him at times, and asked if he got holes with the skis when he put his shoes. They were pretty big. The Jews in the Canadian Army, Canadian Armed Forces in World War II were well served by a remarkable team of Jewish chaplains, including a cousin in my family, Julius Berger. I married my parents as well. And he officiated at my father's bar mitzvah as well. But all Jewish chaplains were released in 1945. And it was in my last years serving in Ottawa at National Defense Headquarters when I had an opportunity to contribute to, things were changing in the Canadian Forces. They wanted to be different. And I made a representation to the committee that coordinates the activities of all chaplains in the Canadian Armed Forces. And at that time, they were all Christian, several different denominations. And the way they determined how many of each there would be was if there were 500 of a denomination, they would get a chaplain. So where were the Jews? Well, they weren't sure if there were 500 Jews in the armed forces. So the theme of my presentation to this committee was, do you want to follow or do you want to lead? And that struck a chord. And it was one of those, if we build it, perhaps they will come. And they decided to install a Jewish chaplain. And I'm proud to say it was a friend of ours, Rabbi Chaim Mendelson of Ottawa. He was the first Jewish chaplain in the Canadian Army since 1945. He was a reservist, served for a few years. Today, we have a full-time chaplain in the regular force, Rabbi Danziger. And I understand Rabbi Danziger convened a minyan at Wainwright a few weeks ago for a Shabbat service. So that's was a long time coming, but that's back again. There may be another Jewish chaplain. I've heard of another, but I don't have the details. And indeed, there is at least one, maybe more, Muslim chaplains.
Does anybody mind if I open the window on the site?
Just to build on your comment, General, my son recently left Royal Military College, where there is an imam, and 2 years ago, when Passover was approaching, my son went to talk to the imam and said, there are a number of us here, the Jewish faith. Is there anything that you could do to organize to support us having a proper Passover service? And the imam took it on himself to go to approach the local community in Kingston, met up with the rabbi, made arrangements that this group of, it was a million, about 12 or 13, young Jewish officer cadets went, accompanied by the Muslim imam, to participate in a Seder. So yes, we have gone full circle in many ways.
If I can just add a comment, it would be unfair if I didn't mention how well served I was over the years by a number of Christian chaplains. One in particular, when I was commanding Western area, that's a piece of land that goes from Thunder Bay to Vancouver Island. My staff would enjoy telling me that it's the largest military district in the world. We were about 12,000 regular, reserve, and civilians in that command at the time. And